forward to being back in the great state of Tennessee with thousands of hardworking American patriots.
President Trump wrapped up a rally in the Tri-Cities earlier tonight. He spoke to supporters for more than an hour.
The president was in Johnson City for a campaign event to support Republicans running for office in November. It was his first visit to East Tennessee as the president.
10 News reporter Mark Salinger was inside the rally and spoke to people who made a point to be there.
Hey guys, good evening from Johnson City, where President Trump just wrapped up his Make America Great Again rally. Now, about 8,000 people filled Freedom Hall here at ETSU as the president gave a familiar message to his supporters.
Hello, Johnson City. It is great to be with you. I am thrilled to be back.
Coming off an eventful week in Washington,
they've been trying to destroy him since the very first second he was announced, because they know that Judge Kavanaugh will follow the Constitution as written.
The president landed in East Tennessee and spoke at length about Brett Kavanaugh and his nomination to the Supreme Court.
Then they want to take a lot longer with the FBI. No, the FBI, they should take, by the way, if we took 10 years, then what more time?
Supporters of the president say the Kavanaugh nomination is an issue they feel passionate about and wanted to hear the president's thoughts on.
Kavanaugh, I mean, that was a huge embarrassment, that what went on. If you look at what happened with Clarence Thomas in '91 and extrapolate to now, it's scary.
The president was in East Tennessee to campaign for Republican candidates, often focusing his speech on potential Democratic challengers in the 2020 election for president.
The Democrats' path to power runs right through Tennessee.
Nearly 2 years since Trump took office, the scenes Monday in Johnson City were reminiscent of the 2016 campaign. If it wasn't already clear, the president's campaign for re-election has already started as he works to get Republicans in Tennessee elected in November.
We will make America great again. Thank you, Tennessee. Thank you.
And this was President Trump's first visit to East Tennessee since he was elected president. Vice President Pence was, of course, in Knoxville just last week, showing just how important the elections in November are in Tennessee. Guys, we'll send it back to you.
All right, Mark, thank you very much.
The president stumped for Republican Senate candidate Marsha Blackburn while he was in Johnson City. Blackburn faces former Democratic Governor Phil Bredesen in the November election. The winner will take the seat held by Bob Corker, who is retiring.
If you haven't registered to vote yet, there is still time. The deadline is October 9th. Early voting starts on October 17th and goes through November 1st. Election Day is November 6th. You can find all the information that you need to register to vote online at WBIR.com.